and this is your commentary on Leviticus chapter 1. Now, in Leviticus, we pick up where we left off in Exodus. Previously, in the Garden of Eden, God walked with his people. When they sinned, he would still come down every now and then and speak to them one-on-one, but that wasn't a consistent basis. At the beginning of Exodus, we saw God meet with Moses in a fiery bush, and then we saw him meet with Moses on top of Mount Sinai. Every time that we met with God, it was always something very fearful. People were afraid for their lives because it was so powerful to see God. But at the end of Exodus, Moses built the tabernacle for the Lord, and God rested in the tent of meeting, in the tabernacle, so he could actually dwell amongst his people. That's where we pick up in Leviticus, with a God who wants to dwell among his people. The Lord called out to Moses. He spoke to him from the tent of meeting. He said, "Speak to the people of Israel. Tell them, suppose any one of you brings an offering to the Lord. You must bring an animal from your herd or flock. If a man brings a burnt offering from the herd, he must offer a male animal. It must not have any flaws. He must bring it to the entrance to the tent of meeting. Then the Lord will accept it." So Leviticus, it's about the Levites. It's going to go over all the rules that they have. Now this is what the priests are going to do in order to offer up sacrifices before the Lord. The very first one that he mentions here is the burnt offering. One of the things that we've said before, and will continue to say, the entire Bible is about the revelation of the Messiah, or the Christ. The entire Bible is about Jesus. Leviticus is no exception. The very first offering that we have here is the burnt offering. All of these offerings show a different component of who the Messiah is supposed to be. But the burnt offering is the very first one that he presents, and for good reason too. We'll get into that as we go on. The man must place his hand on the head of the burnt offering. Then the Lord will accept it in place of him. It will pay for his sin. The young bull must be killed there in the sight of the Lord. Then the priests who are in Aaron's family line must bring its blood to the altar. They must sprinkle it against every side of the altar. The altar stands at the entrance to the tent of meeting. The skin must be removed from the animal that is brought for the burnt offering. Then the animal must be cut into pieces. The priests who are in Aaron's family line must build a fire on the altar. They must place wood on the fire. Then they must place the pieces of the animal on the burning wood on the altar. The pieces include the head and the fat. The inside parts of the animal must be washed with water. The legs must be also washed. The priest must burn all of it on the altar. It is a burnt offering. It is an offering that is made with fire. It gives a smell that is pleasant to the Lord. So the first of the three burnt offerings we have here is with a bull, or an animal from the herd. This animal was supposed to be male, foreshadowing the Messiah. He's supposed to be pure, spotless, without any blemish, also foreshadowing the Messiah. When they cut it up, they removed the skin and they removed the legs and the head and the fat, and so it was completely consumed, both broken apart and then burned up in the fire. So the Messiah too, when he was a sacrifice for our sins, would have to be completely consumed in the process. It wasn't this trivial matter. Also, when they cut the pieces up, they washed the inside, the legs, and the other areas. But this shows that the animal was not only pure on the outside, but also on the inside. So the Messiah too must have pure actions as well as pure motives. If the offering is a burnt offering from the flock, it must be a male animal. It can be a sheep or a goat. It must not have any flaws. It must be killed at the north side of the altar in the sight of the Lord. The priests who are in Aaron's family line must sprinkle its blood against every side of the altar. The animal must be cut into pieces. The priest must place them on the burning wood on the altar. The pieces include the head and the fat. The inside parts must be washed with water. The legs must also be washed. The priest must bring all of it to the altar. He must burn it there. It is a burnt offering. It is an offering that is made with fire. It gives a smell that is pleasant to the Lord. The first one we had was the bull, but now we have the sheep or the goat. But other than that, it's identical. It must be flawless, must be cut up. It must be burned completely. So in the same way that we had the bull offering, we have the sheep offering. Both of them foreshadow the same things. If the offering to the Lord is a burnt offering of birds, it must be a dove or a young pigeon. The priest must bring it to the altar. He must twist its head off. Then he must burn the rest of the bird on the altar. Its blood must be emptied out on the side of the altar. The priest must remove the small bag inside the bird's throat. He must also remove what is in the bag. Then he must throw all of it to the east side of the altar. That is where the ashes are. He must take hold of the wings of the bird and tear it open, but he must not tear it into two. Then the priest will burn it on the wood that is on the fire on the altar. It is a burnt offering. It is an offering that is made with fire. It gives a smell that is pleasant to the Lord. The burnt offering is different from a lot of the other offerings, because in the other ones, some of them, the priest get to partake in it as well. Sometimes the one who's giving the offering gets to partake in it. But the burnt offering has nothing to do with the one who gave it. It's all about something that is pleasing to the Lord, given over to him completely. There is a reason why, out of all the offerings, this is the first one that he's going to mention in Leviticus. And that's because this is probably one of the greatest images that we have of the cross in the New Testament. Just a little bit of background information. The Romans used the cross in order to punish the criminals, the worst of the criminals. The cross was considered one of the most horrendous forms of punishment that has ever been conceived. A person, before going to die on the cross, they would be beaten, they'd be whipped almost to the point of death. Then they would have to take a big beam and carry it all the way to the spot where they were going to die. They would be nailed to these planks of wood and be hung up. It was so painful, the nails would go through your feet and through your hands. And so if you wanted to breathe, because you were hanging from your hands, you would have to push up off of the nail that was in your feet, causing extreme pain. That was in order to breathe. But as soon as you couldn't handle the pain anymore, or your muscles gave out, you would sag back down and start suffocating. This would go on for a while until the Roman soldiers got tired of it. Then they would just go ahead and break your legs so you could no longer push yourself up in order to breathe. This is how the Romans punished and put to death the worst of criminals. And this is what the Messiah was going to have to endure. A complete beating where the skin was literally being torn off of him. The exhaustion from having to carry it all the way down. Constantly being out of breath and having to put yourself in pain in order to be able to breathe. So when it talks about tearing the head off of the birds, tearing the bird open, cutting the animal into pieces with the head and the fat and throwing it completely on the fire. This is the type of punishment that was going to be required to pay for our sins. Only the most severe would be able to compensate for the severity of our sins. The cross was the worst of punishments. And that's actually where we get a word that we use nowadays from. Excruciating. Literally meaning out of the cross. So we even have a word that we use today because of how bad of a punishment it was way back then. That's just the first of the sacrifices that we're going to discuss. We'll talk about the rest of them in future chapters. Now that's it for our commentary on Leviticus chapter 1. Thank you so much for joining me, and I will see you guys next time.